In the heart of Montana's unforgiving wilderness, three of America's most dangerous criminals are about to make a fatal mistake. When escaped death row inmates target what seems to be an isolated farm for their getaway vehicle, they think they've found an easy mark. They couldn't be more wrong. John Miller isn't your average 60-year-old farmer. For 25 years, he was the most feared Delta Force operative in American military history, commanding classified missions in the world's deadliest conflict zones. His call sign was Reaper, a shadow that brought swift, silent justice to those who thought themselves untouchable. This isn't just another prison break story. This is about how three desperate men learned the hard way that some warriors never lose their edge. When they tried to steal his truck, they didn't realize they were walking into a trap set by a master of close-quarters combat. What follows is the story of how one retired operator would turn his peaceful farm into a killing field, using nothing but his tactical genius, decades of combat experience, and a set of farming tools that were about to become deadly weapons. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Wyoming mountains in shades of gold and crimson as Marcus Blackwood walked his property line, a morning ritual unchanged in the 5 years since he'd bought this remote farm. Shadow, his German shepherd, trotted beside him, nose to the ground, but alert as always. The morning air was crisp, winter's bite still sharp, despite spring's approach. Marcus paused at his favorite spot, where the land dipped into a natural valley, providing a clear view of his 80 acres. The main house sat positioned exactly where he'd wanted it, on high ground with clear sightlines in all directions. Old habits died hard, if they died at all. From here, he could see his red barn, the equipment shed, and the 3 pastures. He'd cultivated into productive farmland. Each building had been strategically placed, though his neighbors would never understand why. The grain silo, while functional, also served as an excellent observation post. The raised garden beds provided natural cover approaches to the house. Even his tool shed's position wasn't random. It offered a perfect fallback position with multiple exit routes. "Getting paranoid in your old age," Marcus muttered to himself, but Shadow's ears perked up at his voice. The dog understood more than most humans, having been specially trained before joining Marcus in retirement. Another habit he couldn't shake, surrounding himself with assets that could double as security measures. Inside the house, everything appeared normal. A farmer's house with weathered furniture, family photos, and the comfortable clutter of rural life. But beneath this carefully maintained facade lay another truth. Hidden compartments held weapons and equipment that would raise serious questions if ever discovered. The basement concealed a command center that would make military intelligence officers envious. Even his seemingly ancient tractor had been modified with reinforced panels and run-flat tires. The sound of an approaching vehicle drew his attention. Sarah Miller's pickup truck rattled down his drive, right on schedule. His closest neighbor and the closest thing to a friend he'd allowed himself since moving here. "Morning, Marcus," Sarah called out, climbing down from her truck. At 65, she was as tough as any operator he'd served with, running her ranch single-handedly since her husband's passing. "Thought you might want today's paper. There's something you should see." Marcus took the offered newspaper, immediately noting the bold headline about the prison break. 6 inmates, all former military with violent records, had overpowered guards and escaped during a transport. The article mentioned they were believed to be heading south, exactly in his direction. "Whole town's worried," Sarah said, watching his face as he read. "Sheriff's got everyone on alert, but out here, response times aren't exactly quick." Marcus nodded, his mind already cataloguing preparations. "Thanks for the warning, Sarah. I'll keep an eye out." "You do that," she replied, her eyes lingering, on Shadow's alert posture. You know, sometimes I think you're the only one around here who's actually prepared for trouble. If she only knew, Marcus thought, watching her drive away. He looked down at Shadow, who stared back with intelligent eyes. Might be time for a perimeter check, boy. The quiet life might get interesting. Walking back to his house, Marcus felt the familiar calm settling over him, the focused readiness that had kept him alive through countless missions. He'd chosen this peaceful life, but he'd never stopped being ready for war. Some men found that balance impossible, but for Marcus, it wasn't a choice. It was who he was. Inside, he began his preparations. Not obviously, nothing that would alarm anyone watching. Just a farmer going about his daily routine, but each movement had purpose, each task doubled as preparation. By sunset, he'd be ready. If trouble came looking for him, it would find more than just an old farmer. The sun climbed higher, warming the winter air. To any observer, it was just another quiet morning on a Wyoming farm. But Marcus Blackwood knew better. The peace he'd built here might soon be tested, and he would be ready. Some skills never fade, and some warriors never truly retire. They just find different battlefields. By mid-afternoon, Marcus noticed the first real signs of trouble. Shadow's behavior changed subtly. The dog's ears twitched more frequently toward the north woods, and his usual relaxed patrol pattern became more focused. Marcus had learned long ago to trust his companion's instincts. The local radio crackled with increased chatter. Police bands reported scattered sightings of suspicious individuals, each one closer to his area, but it was the silence between reports that concerned him most. The escapees were moving smart, avoiding main roads and populated areas. While checking his fence line, Marcus found the first physical evidence. Barely visible in the hardening mud, fresh boot prints crossed his property's northern edge. Military. Issue, size 11, deep impressions suggesting the carrier was bearing extra weight. Equipment, probably. The pattern was familiar. Standard tactical formation, 3 men moving in coordination. Getting sloppy, boys, he muttered, noting how they'd broken cover near his property line. They were tired, making mistakes. Dangerous mistakes that would help him track their movements. His satellite phone buzzed, a secure channel he maintained for emergencies. "Thought you should know," his old teammate Jackson's voice came through. "Those escapees, 2 of them, served in Force Recon. Another was Army Rangers. They're not just runners, they're hunters." Marcus absorbed this information with professional detachment. Any indication of their objective? Chatter suggests they're looking for transportation, supplies, planning to cross into Canada through the remote passes. Your farm sits right along their likely route. A truck engine echoed from the distant highway, unusual for this time of day. Marcus watched through his binoculars as a beat-up delivery van slowed near his turnoff before continuing on. Reconnaissance. They were scouting. His property probably noticed his truck in the barn. Sarah's truck appeared again, this time moving faster than usual. Marcus met her at the gate, noting her worried expression. "Town's got reports of break-ins," she said without preamble. "Miller's place was hit last night. They took food, warm clothes, left him tied up in his barn." Marcus's jaw tightened. Tom. Miller was 70, lived alone, an easy target. "He okay?" "Shaken up but alive." "Marcus," Sarah hesitated. "They asked him about neighboring farms, asked specifically about vehicles, who lived alone." The implications were clear. They were gathering intelligence, planning their moves. His farm would be an attractive target, remote location, clear escape routes, and that truck they'd spotted in his barn. Perfect for a cross-country run to the border. As Sarah drove away, Marcus began implementing countermeasures. Not obviously. Everything he did appeared to be normal farm work. Moving the tractor created a natural barrier near the house. Checking irrigation ditches gave him an excuse to verify his hidden sensors. Maintenance on the grain silo let him position additional cameras. Shadow stayed close, reading his master's mood. The dog's training showed in his movements. Careful. Sweeps of the perimeter, always maintaining line of sight with Marcus. They'd done this dance before, in places where the stakes were much higher. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his land. To anyone watching, they'd see a farmer finishing his day's work. They wouldn't notice the subtle preparations, the carefully arranged tools that could double as weapons, the seemingly random objects positioned to create fields of fire. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. These escapees were well-trained, dangerous men. But they were about to learn the difference. Between trained and experienced, between dangerous and lethal. They saw an isolated farm. He saw a carefully prepared battlefield. As dusk approached, Marcus descended into his basement command center. Behind a false wall of preserved foods and old farming equipment lay a room that would have impressed his former Delta Force commanders. Multiple monitors displayed feeds from carefully hidden cameras, while topographical maps of his property lined the walls, each marked with defensive positions and potential approaches. "Time to wake up the old systems, Shadow," he murmured, powering up equipment that hadn't been used since his last security check. The dog sat alertly by his side, watching the screens with practiced interest. They'd spent years together in operations centers far more sophisticated than this, but the principles remained the same. His satellite communication system connected to a secure network maintained by his former team. Information scrolled across one screen: prison break details, suspect profiles, last known locations. Marcus studied the escapees' photos with professional interest. Their leader, James Razor Keller, had extensive special operations experience. His expression in the mugshot revealed the cold calculation that had earned him his nickname. The basement's hidden armory contained weapons he'd legally acquired over the years, supplemented by equipment that wouldn't appear on any official records. Marcus began his preparations methodically, muscle memory taking over as he checked each piece. Some habits never died, like the way he arranged his equipment in precise order, or how he unconsciously counted his magazines 3 times. A subtle vibration from his perimeter sensors drew his attention to the monitors. A deer moved cautiously through his north field, but Marcus noticed something else. The animal's behavior suggested it had been recently startled. Someone was moving through his woods. "Getting closer, aren't they, boy?" Marcus commented to Shadow, who growled softly in agreement. He switched to thermal imaging, scanning the tree line. Nothing yet, but thermal signatures didn't lie. The cooling ground showed traces of recent movement. Multiple bodies had passed through less than an hour ago. His satellite phone buzzed again. "Ghost, it's Hammer!" His old teammate's voice was tense. "Local police just found the delivery. Van abandoned 10 miles from you. Signs of military-style camp preparation in the woods nearby. They're staging for something." Marcus acknowledged the information wordlessly. The pieces were falling into place. The escapees needed transportation. Suitable for winter terrain, well-maintained and reliable. His modified truck, glimpsed in his barn during their earlier reconnaissance, would seem perfect for their needs. A quick check of his security feeds confirmed his suspicions. Movement in the forest had a clear pattern now. 3-man teams, establishing observation points, watching his farm's routine. They were good, he had to admit. If he hadn't spent decades perfecting the art of counter-surveillance, he might have missed the signs. He began powering down non-essential systems, leaving only the critical security network active. No sense in unexplained power signatures giving away his preparations. Each piece of equipment returned to its hidden compartment, each weapon to its concealed position. To any observer, the basement would appear ordinary, just another farmer's storage room. Before heading upstairs, Marcus paused at his workbench, running his fingers over a worn wooden box. Inside lay his old Delta Force insignia and the medal he never displayed. Memories of past operations surfaced briefly. Missions, in places that didn't officially exist, against enemies who were never officially acknowledged. Different battlefield, he reminded himself, same principles. Shadow's ears perked up at his voice, the dog's posture reflecting his master's growing alertness. They moved upstairs together, each step measured and silent. Another old habit, emerging naturally. The evening settled over his farm like a blanket, the darkness both concealing and revealing. To his trained eyes, the landscape transformed into a tactical map. Fields of fire, approach routes, choke points. Every feature he'd carefully maintained over the years for exactly this kind of situation. These men might be well trained, might even be dangerous, but they were about to learn why Marcus Blackwood's call sign had once been whispered with fear in the world's darkest corners. Some skills didn't fade with time. They just waited for the right moment to resurface. The kitchen clock ticked steadily as Marcus prepared his evening meal, each movement precise and economical. Shadow lay by the door, his relaxed posture betrayed only by his regularly twitching ears. Through the window, the last rays of sunlight painted long shadows across the snow-covered fields, creating natural lines of sight Marcus had memorized years ago. His satellite phone had gone quiet, a silence that spoke volumes. The police bands had also fallen silent, suggesting the searchers had lost the escapees' trail. But Marcus knew better. They weren't lost. They were positioning themselves, waiting for full darkness. The evening stillness felt heavy with anticipation. Even the usual night birds had gone quiet, sensing the tension in the air. Marcus moved through his house, performing what appeared to be normal evening routines. Checking windows, but also confirming firing angles, securing doors, while verifying his preset defensive positions, testing lights, each one positioned to create specific shadows and blind spots. Sarah's truck appeared one final time, moving slowly past his gate without stopping. Their prearranged signal, she'd spotted something concerning. 3 flashes of brake lights as she turned onto the main road, multiple suspicious vehicles in the area. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he washed his dinner dishes. These men thought they were being clever, using the approaching storm as cover. Local weather had predicted heavy snow by midnight, perfect conditions for their planned theft and escape. But the weather would work both ways, concealing his movements as effectively as theirs. In his living room, Marcus settled into his favorite chair, positioned to observe all approaches to the house. The TV played an old western, its sound providing background noise while masking any preparations he made. Shadow remained by his side, both of them appearing relaxed but ready. His thoughts drifted to his last active mission, years ago, in a mountain range far from here. Another night of waiting, of knowing that contact was inevitable. The same calm had settled over him then, not the absence of fear, but its transformation into focused awareness. The first snowflakes began to fall as true darkness settled. Through his thermal scopes, Marcus detected faint heat signatures moving at the edge of his property. They were taking their time, being thorough, professional. In other circumstances, he might have admired their patience. A distant owl called once, then fell silent. Not a natural pattern, a signal. They were coordinating their approach, probably planning to move in once the storm provided proper cover. Marcus checked his watch. 2 hours until the heavy snow was predicted to start. He rose slowly, stretching like a man preparing for bed. To any observers, he appeared to be following his normal routine. They wouldn't see how he checked his concealed weapons, verified his communications, or measured exact distances to pre-selected points on his property. Shadow followed him upstairs, both of them moving with practiced silence. In his bedroom, Marcus went through the motions of preparing for sleep. The lights went out at exactly the same time as every other night. No reason to make his observers suspicious. In the darkness, he allowed his other senses to expand, feeling, The rhythm of his property, as he had countless times in combat zones, the slight vibration of movement through the ground, the changing patterns of night sounds, the subtle shifts in air pressure that suggested people trying to move undetected. Almost. "Time, boy," he whispered to Shadow. The dog's eyes gleamed in the darkness, reflecting the same focused anticipation. Soon, these men would make their move, confident they had the advantage of surprise. Marcus settled into position, his farmer's clothes concealing equipment that would have been familiar to his Delta Force teammates. The calm of imminent action settled over him like an old friend. Let them come. Some storms weren't predicted by any weather service. The storm hit just before midnight, thick snow reducing visibility to mere yards. Through his thermal imaging, Marcus watched three distinct groups converge on his property. Their movement patterns confirmed his earlier assessment. Military. Trained, probably special operations background. They maintained proper spacing, used hand signals, and approached from coordinated angles. The first team moved toward his barn, their path suggesting they'd studied the property's layout. The second team took up overwatch positions at his property's edge, while the third, likely their most experienced operators, approached the house directly. Standard tactical deployment for a quick, overwhelming assault. Shadow's ears twitched. At a sound too faint for normal hearing, the slight crunch of snow under boots trying to move silently, Marcus remained motionless in his concealed position, watching through specialized optics as the first team reached his barn. Their lockpicking skills were impressive. It took them less than 30 seconds to breach the side door. "Check the truck," a whispered command carried through the wind. "Make sure it'll start. We go as soon as the snow's heavy enough to cover our tracks." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. They'd found exactly what he wanted them to find. His truck, apparently ready for a long journey. They wouldn't notice. The subtle modifications? Not yet. Just as they hadn't noticed the pressure plates they'd triggered crossing his yard, or the sensors their radio communications had activated. The second team maintained their watch positions, but Marcus noted their rookie mistake. They'd positioned themselves for maximum visibility of the house and barn, not considering that these same positions made their thermal signatures stand out against the cold ground. He could read their every movement. Inside the barn, the first team had finished their initial inspection. "Vehicle looks good," one reported over their radio. "Full tank, well maintained. Old man keeps it ready to go." "Too ready," another voice responded, deeper, more authoritative. "Must be Keller, their leader. Check it for tracking devices. Last thing we need is some farmer's LoJack giving us away." They were thorough, Marcus had to admit. Professional, but they made the same mistake most professionals did. They assumed technical threats were more dangerous than human ones. They searched his truck for electronics, but missed the subtle signs of its defensive modifications. The third team reached his porch, moving with the practiced grace of experienced operators. Their leader held up a closed fist. Wait signal. Through the storm, Marcus watched them prepare for breach. 2 men approached his door, while 2 others covered his ground floor windows. Standard entry protocol. Shadow tensed beside him, reading his master's subtle shift in posture. The dog's training showed in his complete silence, even as multiple intruders moved through their territory. They'd done this dance before, in places where a single sound meant death. "In position," whispered a voice over their radio channel. "No movement inside. Thermal shows the bedroom heat signature hasn't changed. Old man's still sleeping." Marcus checked his watch. 11 minutes since they'd crossed his first perimeter sensor. They'd moved faster than he'd expected, but their confidence was making them aggressive, sloppy, the kind of mistakes that got operators killed in the field. The storm intensified, snow now falling so heavily it nearly masked the thermal signatures of the men outside. Perfect conditions for their planned theft and escape, also perfect conditions for what Marcus had planned. "Execute in 3, Keller's voice commanded. Team 1, start the truck on my mark. Team 2, maintain overwatch. Team 3, prepare. To breach, remember, no unnecessary violence. In and out, clean and quick. Marcus shifted slightly, settling into a more comfortable position. Years of experience had taught him the value of patience, of letting the enemy commit fully to their plan before disrupting it. These men were good, but they'd made a fatal error. They thought they were hunting a simple farmer. Instead, they'd walked into a trap laid by someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of turning hunters into prey. The first sign that something was wrong came when Team 1 tried to start Marcus's truck. The engine turned over perfectly, then died immediately. A second attempt produced the same result. A third try yielded nothing but silence. "Something's wrong," the team leader whispered into his radio. "Engine's dead. Somebody's tampered with." His transmission cut off abruptly as Marcus activated his barn's defensive systems. Metal shutters slammed down over the doors and windows, the sound masked by the howling storm. Industrial-grade magnetic locks engaged, turning the barn into a sealed container. Team 1 was now effectively trapped. "Team 1, report!" Keller's voice crackled with authority. "What's happening?" The response came through garbled, their radio signals weakening. "We're locked in? Doors are sealed? Some kind of security system? This isn't a normal..." Their communications died completely as Marcus engaged his signal jammers. Now each team was isolated, unable to coordinate. Just as he'd planned, the reaction was immediate. Team 3 abandoned their careful approach to the house, shifting to aggressive entry tactics. The first man kicked his front door with enough force to shatter a normal lock. Instead, a reinforced frame absorbed the impact, sending the operator stumbling backward. "Contact front!" Team 2's sniper called out, catching a glimpse of movement in an upstairs window. But Marcus was already gone, having triggered the distraction that drew their attention. Keller's voice cut through the storm, no longer bothering with radio silence. "This isn't a normal farm. Spread out, find..." His order was interrupted by a series of explosions, not lethal charges, but carefully placed flashbangs that turned the snowy night into brief moments of disorienting day. Team 2's carefully chosen observation posts became liabilities as snow-covered reflective surfaces amplified the effects. Shadow moved like a ghost through the chaos, exactly as trained. The Belgian Malinois targeted Team 3's rear security, not to attack, but to create confusion. A sudden snarl, a dark shape in the storm, then nothing. Classic psychological warfare. "He's got a dog," someone shouted. "Watch your..." More. Flashbangs detonated, the sequence designed to disorient without creating a pattern they could adapt to. Marcus used the confusion to move between prepared positions, each one offering different angles on the intruders. Inside the barn, Team 1 had discovered another problem. The air was becoming thin. Not dangerous yet, but Marcus's ventilation system was gradually reducing oxygen levels. They'd have to choose soon between attempting a breach or signaling surrender. "This is wrong," one of Team 3's members said, his voice tight with growing tension. "The door, the security systems, the coordinated response. We're not dealing with some farmer." Keller remained controlled, but Marcus could hear the strain in his voice. "Fall back to defensive positions. Whatever this is, we're not..." A new sound cut through the night, police sirens distant but approaching. Marcus's automated system had alerted local law enforcement the moment the intruders triggered his first perimeter sensor. The storm would slow their response, but the timeline had now shifted. "We've got incoming." Team 2's remaining lookout reported. "Multiple vehicles, law enforcement." The realization hit them all at once. They weren't executing a simple theft anymore. They were trapped in an increasingly hostile situation with no clear escape route. Their carefully planned operation had become a survival scenario. Marcus watched through his thermal optics as the teams tried to regroup, their movements becoming more urgent but less coordinated. They were well trained, but they were starting. to realize a fundamental truth. All their tactical expertise meant nothing if someone had prepared the battlefield against them. "Last chance," Marcus broadcast over their own radio frequency, his voice cold and professional. "Surrender now, or find out why they called me Winter Ghost." The storm raged on, but a different kind of chill settled over the operators. They'd crossed a line, all right, but not the one they thought. They'd walked into the killing ground of a Delta Force legend, and their night was about to get much, much worse. From his elevated position in the modified grain silo, Marcus watched the chaos unfold through military-grade optics. The storm provided perfect cover, but his thermal imaging cut through the swirling snow, showing him exactly what he needed to see. Each target appeared as a bright signature against the cold background, their movements telling him everything about their training and experience. Team 1 remained trapped in the barn, their thermal signatures clustering near the doors. As they searched for weaknesses, their movements were methodical, professional, force recon training showing in their systematic approach, but they'd made a crucial mistake in allowing themselves to be contained. In the field, that would have been a fatal error. "Amateur hour," Marcus muttered, noting how Team 2 had split up after the flashbangs, losing their coordinated coverage. Their sniper had abandoned his original position. Good instinct, but he'd chosen his secondary spot poorly. The man was visible from 3 different angles now, though he probably thought himself well concealed. Keller was proving more interesting. His movements showed evidence of advanced tactical training, possibly special operations background. He'd immediately recognized the sophistication of Marcus's security system and was now trying to rally his scattered forces into a coherent defensive position. Through his command tablet, Marcus monitored the oxygen levels in the barn. He'd calibrated the system carefully, uncomfortable but not dangerous. Team 1's options were diminishing by the minute. They'd already tried breaching the doors with equipment from his truck, not realizing the entire structure had been reinforced specifically for this kind of situation. Shadow's threatening growls continued to move around the perimeter, the dog executing his training perfectly. The psychological impact was obvious in the team's thermal signatures, elevated heart rates showing as brighter cores, their movements becoming more erratic as unseen threats materialized and vanished in the storm. "Contact east," one of Team 2's operators called out, firing a burst at a moving shadow. Marcus had anticipated this, stress and fear leading to degraded fire discipline. The shots went wide, hitting nothing but snow and pre-positioned decoys. "Cease fire! Maintain discipline!" Keller's command cut through the wind. "Form up on me. Whatever this is, we handle it like professionals." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. They were trying to adapt, to regain the initiative. But every move they made had been anticipated, wargamed through countless scenarios. This wasn't just his farm. It was a carefully crafted tactical environment designed by someone with decades of combat experience. Police sirens grew louder, though the storm would delay their arrival. Marcus checked his tactical display, noting how the approaching law enforcement had inadvertently become part of his strategy. The escapees were now caught between his defenses and external pressure, their options diminishing by the minute. A brief radio burst from Team 1 revealed their growing desperation. "Can't breach these doors. Some kind of military-grade locks. Who the hell is this farmer?" Marcus switched observation positions, moving with the silence of long practice. Each step had been rehearsed, every angle considered. He'd spent years preparing for situations like this, turning his entire property into a defensive weapon. Keller's tactical experience showed as he attempted to reorganize his scattered forces. Team 2 collapsed to secondary positions. Team 1 conserve oxygen and stand by. This isn't over. But Marcus could read the uncertainty in their movements now. Their original plan had assumed a simple target, an isolated farmer, an easy vehicle theft. Instead, they'd encountered sophisticated security systems, coordinated defensive measures, and an unseen opponent who seemed to anticipate their every move. Through his thermal scope, Marcus watched their body language tell the story their voices wouldn't admit. These men were trained operators, experienced in combat, but they were beginning to realize they weren't the hunters anymore. They were prey, caught in a trap designed by someone who'd spent their entire career learning how to dismantle organizations much more dangerous than a prison escape team. The first direct confrontation came when two members of Team 2 tried to circle behind the house. Marcus had been waiting for this. Their movements suggested they were looking for utility access, hoping to disable his power and security systems. A classic tactical approach, but one he'd prepared for. Through his thermal scope, he watched them approach the fake electrical panel he'd installed years ago. The first operator moved to cover, while the second began working on the panel's lock. Both were focused on their task, committing the cardinal sin of tunnel vision. Marcus moved like a ghost, his years of Delta Force experience evident in every silent step. The storm covered any minor sounds, while his white winter camouflage made him nearly invisible in the swirling snow. 20 feet. 15. 10. The covering operator sensed something at the last moment, starting to turn. Too late. Marcus struck with practiced efficiency, a precision nerve strike that dropped the man without a sound. Before the second operator could react, Marcus had him in a chokehold, applying pressure to exactly the right points. "Sleep," Marcus whispered as the man lost consciousness. Both operators were down in less than 5 seconds, their weapons secured and communications disabled. He zip-tied them efficiently, positioning them out of the storm's worst effects. No need for unnecessary roughness. They were just pawns in a larger game. "Team 4, report status." Keller's voice crackled over the radio. Silence answered. "Him. Team 4, acknowledge." Marcus keyed into their frequency. "They're taking a nap, Keller. Might want to rethink your strategy." The response was immediate. Concentrated fire toward his last known position, but Marcus was already gone, moving through pre-planned routes to his next engagement area. These men were good, but they were fighting on his territory, against defenses he'd spent years perfecting. Inside the barn, Team 1's situation was deteriorating. The reduced oxygen levels were affecting their judgment, their movements becoming less coordinated. Marcus watched through internal cameras as they debated their options. "We need to breach now," one argued. "Before we're too weak to fight." "Breach? Into what?" another countered. "You saw what he did to Teams 2 and 4. This isn't some random farmer. We're dealing with a professional." Shadow's threatening growls moved closer to the barn, adding psychological pressure to their physical discomfort. The dog was playing his role perfectly, never staying in one place long enough to become a target. Keller attempted to restore control of the situation. "All teams, fall back to defensive positions around the barn. We breach as a unit. Extract." Team 1 then. His order was interrupted by a series of precisely timed detonations. Non-lethal charges that Marcus had placed long ago erupted in choreographed sequence, cutting off planned retreat routes and further separating the teams. The snow amplified the concussive effects, disorienting men already on edge. Through the chaos, Marcus moved with lethal grace. A third operator went down to a precise strike, never seeing what hit him. A fourth made the mistake of firing blindly, giving away his position. A rubber training round, non-lethal but extremely painful, ended his participation in the night's activities. "Who are you?" Keller's voice held new respect, tinged with growing fear. "What do you want?" Marcus allowed himself a cold smile as he keyed his radio. "Just a farmer protecting his property. But you might know me better as Winter Ghost." The effect was immediate. Marcus could see Keller's thermal signature stiffen with recognition. That call sign had once been whispered in special operations circles with a mixture of awe and fear. Delta Force, Keller breathed. We walked right into a trap, Marcus. Finished for him. Now, would you like to surrender, or should I continue demonstrating why that nickname stuck? Inside the barn, Team 1's confidence had evaporated completely. The faint hiss of the ventilation system reminded them with every breath that they were trapped in a sophisticated containment system. Through the barn's security cameras, Marcus watched their growing desperation. "You don't understand," one of them whispered urgently into his radio. "These locks aren't normal. The walls are reinforced. This whole barn is a damn prison cell." Outside, Keller was trying to maintain control of his dwindling forces. 3 more operators had gone silent in the last 10 minutes, their thermal signatures now showing them lying. Motionless, but alive in the snow. Each one had been taken down with surgical precision, the hallmark of Delta Force close quarters combat. "Listen to me," Keller broadcast on their shared frequency. "Winter Ghost was a legend in special operations. If this is really him, we're not dealing with some retired farmer. We're in the kill box of one of the most lethal operators ever to serve." Marcus allowed that information to sink in as he moved to his next position. Shadow's growls had herded the remaining operators into increasingly confined spaces, limiting their movement options. The storm worked in his favor, the heavy snow making every shadow seem threatening. "You've got nowhere to go," Marcus transmitted calmly. "Police are 8 minutes out. Your team is down to less than half strength. The barn team has about 15 minutes of comfortable breathing left. Time to make some hard choices." A burst of gunfire answered him, wild, uncontrolled. Fear shooting, not tactical response. Marcus had seen it before in other operations. When professional operators realized they'd lost control of the situation, they sometimes reverted to basic instincts. "Hold your fire!" Keller commanded, but the damage was done. They'd wasted ammunition and given away 3 more positions. Marcus marked them on his tactical display, already planning his next sequence of moves. In the barn, the situation reached a breaking point. One of the trapped operators slammed his rifle butt against the reinforced door in frustration. "We've got to get out of here. The air's getting thinner." "Stand down," his team leader ordered. "This is exactly what he wants, making us panic, waste energy, burn through our oxygen faster." Marcus switched to their frequency. "Smart man. Your team leader's right. The ventilation system is calibrated precisely. Stay calm. You've got air. Get aggressive, you'll make things worse." The psychological impact was immediate. His casual confirmation of their situation, the professional tone that suggested complete control, it broke something in their resistance. The team leader keyed his radio. "This is Team 1, actual. We'd like to discuss terms." Keller's voice cut in sharply. "Maintain discipline. Nobody surrenders. We still have—" "You have nothing," Marcus interrupted, his tone cold. 4 of your men are unconscious in the snow. 3 more are trapped in a barn running out of air. Your remaining operators are scattered, low on ammo, and about to face a police response team in the middle of a snowstorm." As if to emphasize his point, Shadow materialized briefly near one of the remaining operators, causing the man to stumble backward into a snowbank. By the time he regained his footing, both dog and handler had vanished again into the storm. "You planned this," Keller realized aloud. "Everything, the truck, the barn, the security systems. This whole farm is one big tactical operation." "Not exactly," Marcus replied. "It's my home. I just made sure it could be defended against men like you. Now we've got about 7 minutes until this becomes a police problem. Your call, Keller. But remember, they won't be as gentle as I've been." The tables had turned completely. Through his command tablet, Marcus watched the remaining operators' thermal signatures bunch together. A classic defensive formation, but one that played directly into his hands. They'd abandoned their original tactical spread in favor of mutual protection, sacrificing mobility for perceived security. 5 minutes to police arrival, Marcus broadcast calmly. Let me explain exactly how this ends. Option 1, you surrender now, I disable my security systems, and you face standard custody. Option 2, you resist, and I demonstrate why Delta Force operators earned their reputation. Keller's response was immediate but strained. You're bluffing. Delta or not, you're outnumbered. We still have a series of precise shots cut him off, not from Marcus's position, but from automated defense systems he'd activated remotely. Rubber training rounds struck the snow around their position with surgical accuracy. A demonstration, nothing more, but the message was clear. They were surrounded by capabilities they couldn't see or counter. Was that a bluff? Marcus asked quietly. Shadow circled their position, his growls seemingly coming from multiple directions as sound bounced off snow-covered surfaces. The psychological pressure was visible in their thermal signatures, elevated core temperatures showing increasing stress levels. Inside the barn, Team 1 had reached their breaking point. "We surrender," their leader called out. "Full surrender. No resistance, just get us out of here." Marcus watched their thermal signatures move away from the doors, hands raised. Wise choice. Remain in position, hands visible. Ventilation will return to normal in 30 seconds. The remaining operators outside witnessed their colleagues surrender through the barn's windows. The effect on morale was immediate and devastating. These were trained men, experienced in combat, but they'd never faced an opponent who could turn an entire property into a weapon. 3 minutes, Marcus reminded them. The police response will include state tactical units. They're already aware this involves escaped prisoners with military backgrounds. Their response won't be gentle. Keller's thermal signature showed him processing options. His movements those of a man searching for solutions and finding none. His remaining team members looked to him for direction, but their body language revealed they'd lost faith in their mission. Marcus moved silently through the storm, positioning himself for the endgame. Each step had been practiced countless times, every movement designed to remain invisible, even to trained observers. He'd spent years perfecting these patterns, turning his entire property into a tactical advantage. "Last chance, Keller," Marcus transmitted. "You've lost half your team without me firing a single lethal round. Want to see what happens when I stop playing nice?" As if to emphasize his point, more automated systems activated. Spotlights cut through the storm from unexpected angles, momentarily blinding the operators. Their disorientation was complete, unable to identify safe zones or escape routes, surrounded by defenses they couldn't counter. "You didn't just stumble onto some farmer's property," Marcus continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of combat experience. "You walked into a prepared position held by someone who spent their career planning for exactly this scenario. Think carefully about your next move." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, cutting through the storm. Shadow's growls intensified, the trained war dog closing the circle around the increasingly desperate men. Their options had dwindled to a single choice: surrender or face consequences they weren't prepared to handle. Keller's shoulders slumped slightly, a gesture visible only through thermal imaging, but one Marcus recognized instantly. The fight was leaving him, replaced by the recognition that they'd catastrophically underestimated their target. With his property secured and the police minutes away, Marcus moved to the next phase of his operation. The escapees' tracks in the snow told him they had a fallback position, their movements too confident, their equipment too well prepared for men running blind. "Shadow, guard," he commanded softly. The dog took position watching the subdued prisoners, while Marcus retrieved his specialized gear. Within minutes, he'd transitioned from defensive mode to something more familiar. Full tactical loadout, carefully maintained equipment that hadn't seen use since his Delta days. Through his thermal imaging, he tracked the prisoners' original approach path. Their bootprints told a story to his trained eye. weight distribution suggesting they'd carried significant supplies, spacing indicating military formation. They had a base camp somewhere close. "Base, this is Ghost," he transmitted on his secure channel. His old teammate Jackson answered immediately. "Go ahead, Ghost. Primary target secured. Moving to locate their staging area. Probable additional threats. Police ETA 3 minutes. Want me to delay them?" Marcus considered this. "Affirmative. Give me 15. These men were too well equipped for a prison break. Something else is going on here." The storm provided perfect cover as he moved through the darkness. Years of operating in the world's most hostile environments had taught him to read terrain instinctively. The escapees would want somewhere defensible but hidden, with clear escape routes and good observation points. There, a flicker of heat through his thermal scope. An abandoned ranger station a mile north of his property, perfect location for a temporary base. As he approached, more signs confirmed his suspicion. Professional camouflage netting, carefully concealed lookout positions, even counter-surveillance measures. "This wasn't just a prison break," he muttered, noting the military grade. Equipment partially hidden under tarps, communication gear, weapons, supplies, far more than escaped prisoners could have acquired quickly. Movement ahead, 2 heat signatures in a concealed position. Additional security, probably unaware their primary team had been compromised. Their positioning was professional, but predictable. These men had the same training as the others. Marcus ghosted through their perimeter with practiced ease. Their security preparations were good, but he'd spent decades learning to defeat exactly these kinds of defenses. Within minutes, he was inside their command post. The interior told him everything he needed to know. Detailed maps of the Canadian border, high-end forgery equipment, multiple sets of identification documents. This wasn't just an escape, it was an extraction operation. A laptop glowed softly in the corner, its screen showing an encrypted communication channel. Marcus moved silently to examine it. His years of intelligence training coming back instantly. The messages were coded, but he recognized the pattern, similar to those used by certain private military contractors. "Base. Ghost," he whispered. Into his radio. "You're going to want to see this. We've got a bigger situation. These aren't just escapees. They're assets being pulled out by someone with serious resources." The sound of a twig snapping outside froze him in place. Someone was returning to the command post. Marcus melted into the shadows, falling back on skills that had kept him alive in countless similar situations. 2 men entered, brushing snow from their tactical gear. Their movement patterns screamed professional military training. "No word from Keller's team," one said, checking a radio. "They should have acquired transport by now." "Give them time," the other replied. "That farm looked like an easy target. Old man living alone, perfect vehicle for the border run." What could go wrong? Marcus allowed himself a cold smile in the darkness. They were about to learn exactly what could go wrong when you underestimate a Delta Force operator on his own territory. Marcus watched from the shadows as the 2 operators continued their conversation, each word revealing more about their operation. "Timeline's blown," the first operator said, checking an encrypted tablet. "Extraction team is waiting at the border. Without transport, this whole operation is—" He never finished the sentence. Marcus moved with the fluid precision that had made him a legend in Delta Force, crossing the space in complete silence. The first operator went down to a precise strike to the vagus nerve, unconscious before he could process what was happening. The second man was better, managing to start a defensive move. But Marcus had been dealing with better opponents for decades. A swift combination of strikes, learned in combat zones across the world, ended the brief resistance. "Base. Ghost," Marcus transmitted, securing the unconscious men. 2 more tangos down. You'll want to see what's on their comms. This isn't just an extraction, it's a full black operation. The laptop revealed an extensive network. The prison break had been orchestrated by a private military corporation, using the escapees as cover to extract something or someone more valuable. Marcus accessed their encrypted communications with practiced ease. His time in Delta had given him extensive experience with similar systems. The messages painted a concerning picture. "Asset secure," one message read. "Timeline critical." The response was coded, but clear to Marcus's trained eye. They were using the prison break to mask the extraction of a high-value target. Someone with information worth the risk and expense of this elaborate operation. Movement on his thermal scope. 3 more heat signatures approaching the ranger station. Their movement patterns suggested special operations training, probably the extraction team's backup unit. Marcus smiled coldly. They were about to discover why his call sign had once struck fear into America's enemies. He keyed his radio one final time. "Base, delay police response, another 5 minutes. Going dark for backup team containment." He moved through the ranger station with practiced efficiency, positioning himself for maximum tactical advantage. These men were well trained, but they were about to face someone who had helped write the book on close-quarters combat. The first operator breached the door professionally, his technique perfect. But Marcus had already changed the battlefield. A precisely placed flashbang, one of several he'd quickly positioned, detonated at the perfect moment. The disoriented team never had a chance. Marcus moved through them like a ghost. Each strike calculated and precise. Within seconds, 3 more highly trained operators lay unconscious. Checking their equipment confirmed his suspicions. These weren't just mercenaries. They were former special operations, now working for private contractors. Their gear was top tier, their methods professional. The laptop contained more revelations. Coded messages about Project Stillwater, references to classified intelligence, and coordinates for a border crossing point. This was bigger than a simple prison break. Marcus photographed key documents with his tactical camera, transmitting the intelligence through secure channels. His old team would know what to do with this information. "Ghost, base," Jackson's voice crackled. "Just got your intel. CIA's very interested. How do you want to play this?" Marcus surveyed his handiwork. 8 highly trained operators, neutralized without a single fatality. An international extraction operation dismantled by one man. "Tell them Winter Ghost sends his regards," he replied coldly, "and remind them why some legends are better left retired." The first sign of the extraction team's main force came as a low thrumming in the air. Helicopters, running dark and low to avoid radar detection. Marcus tracked them through his thermal scope as he made his way back to the farm. 2 black Hawks, military surplus but upgraded with civilian markings. Their approach pattern suggested experienced pilots. "Base, we've got airborne visitors," he transmitted. "Look military, flying civilian. Confirm response team status." "Local authorities held at staging area," Jackson replied. "CIA assets inbound. 20 minutes out. You got unwanted company." Marcus reached his perimeter just as the helicopters began their insertion. Their technique was flawless. Fast rope deployment from multiple angles, immediate establishment of a defensive perimeter. These weren't mercenaries. They were Tier 1 operators, probably former special forces. "Target is now priority 1. A voice crackled over their comm frequency. "Asset confirmation required. Winter Ghost's presence means potential compromise. Full tactical response authorized." In his command center, Marcus watched 12 new thermal signatures deploy across his property. Their movement patterns confirmed his assessment. These men were elite, their coordination perfect. They moved like shadows through the storm, using textbook small unit tactics. But Marcus had written some of those textbooks. "Shadow, execute pattern Delta," he commanded softly. The dog moved like a ghost through the snow, activating pre-positioned sensors. Marcus's property came alive with defensive measures he'd spent years perfecting. The first team hit his outer perimeter traps, non-lethal but highly effective. Strobing lights and focused sound pulses disrupted their night vision and radio. Coordination, their professional response, only made them more vulnerable to his prepared countermeasures. "Contact front," one operator called out as Marcus's automated defenses activated. Rubber rounds and flashbangs created chaos in their carefully planned formation. Their training showed as they attempted to adapt, but each defensive position they took had been pre-sighted in Marcus's targeting system. Through his thermal imaging, Marcus watched their commander attempt to reorganize. "Reform on me! Secondary approach vector!" "Negative," another voice cut in. "They're herding us. These aren't random defenses. Entire property's a kill zone." Marcus moved through his prepared positions like a ghost, his decades of experience evident in every motion. 3 operators went down to precision shots from his non-lethal weapons. 2 more fell to close-quarters combat they never saw coming. The helicopters tried to provide support, their infrared sensors scanning for targets. But Marcus had prepared for this too. Automated countermeasures created false heat signatures, while his true position remained masked by specialized equipment. "Target is a former Delta Force commander," the team leader broadcast, his voice tight with professional concern. "Repeat, we are engaging Winter Ghost on prepared terrain. Request." Immediate, his transmission cut off as Marcus's electronic warfare suite overwhelmed their communications. The remaining operators found themselves isolated, unable to coordinate their movements. The snow-covered farm had transformed into a battlefield where every feature concealed a potential threat. Marcus had designed it this way, turning ordinary agricultural equipment and structures into tactical advantages. "This isn't a farm," one operator realized aloud. "It's a combat training facility disguised as a farm. We've walked into a trap," Marcus finished, his voice carrying through their compromised radio net. "Now, would you like to discuss why a private military corporation is running an illegal extraction operation on my property?" As Marcus systematically dismantled the extraction team's assault, a familiar voice crackled over their compromised communications, one that stopped him cold. "Stand down, Marcus. You're interfering with a sanctioned operation." Colonel Richards, his former commanding officer in Delta Force, a man who'd supposedly retired 3 years ago. "Interesting company you're keeping these days, Colonel," Marcus replied, maintaining his position as he processed this revelation. "Private military contractors, prison breaks, getting a bit far from the flag, aren't we?" A helicopter swept low, its searchlight cutting through the storm. In its beam, Marcus caught a glimpse of a figure stepping out of the second Black Hawk, Richards himself, still moving with the same military precision Marcus remembered. "It's not what you think," Richards transmitted. "Project Stillwater wasn't just another operation. We found something, Marcus, something that certain people would pay anything to keep buried." The pieces started falling into place. Marcus accessed the encrypted files he'd pulled from the Ranger Station command post. Project Stillwater, a classified Delta Force operation from 15 years ago, his last mission before retirement. "The bioweapons facility," Marcus said, slowly. "The one that officially didn't exist. The one where we found evidence of American contractors testing experimental compounds on civilians," Richards confirmed. "Evidence that disappeared from official channels 24 hours later." Marcus watched through his thermal scope as the remaining operators took defensive positions around Richards. Their movements suggested they were protecting someone else. Another figure still in the helicopter. Dr. Chen, Marcus realized. Our team's medical officer, the one who documented everything. "The one who kept copies," Richards corrected. "Copies that certain corporate interests have spent 15 years trying to locate. She contacted me last week, said she couldn't live with the silence anymore, wanted to go public." Through the storm, Marcus tracked multiple heat signatures, converging on his position. Not the extraction team, different movement patterns, government agents, probably CIA, moving to contain the situation. "So you arranged her escape through a prison break," Marcus said, the full picture becoming clear. "Use the chaos as cover to get her across the border before they could silence her." "Had to make it look like a standard prison escape," Richards explained. "But someone talked. They found out, sent their own team to intercept. Your farm was supposed to be just another stop on the escape route." "Until you realized who owned it," Marcus finished. The irony wasn't lost on him. Of all the farms along their escape route, they'd chosen one belonging to a former Delta operator who'd been part of the original mission. A new voice joined their conversation. Dr. Chen, speaking from the helicopter. "I remember you, Ghost. You were there. You saw what they did. Those people, they deserve justice." Marcus checked his tactical display. CIA teams were nearly in position. In minutes, this would become a very different kind of operation. "Maybe so," he replied, "but there's something you both need to know. When I bought this farm, started preparing these defenses, it wasn't just paranoia." Richard's thermal signature shifted slightly, the subtle tell of a man realizing he'd missed something crucial. "What do you mean?" the colonel asked, tension evident in his voice. "Because I never stopped investigating Project Stillwater," Marcus said coldly, "and you're not the only one who's been waiting 15 years to expose the truth." The storm intensified as Marcus activated his farm's final defensive protocols. 15 years of preparation had led to this moment. His command center's main screen displayed a classified file he'd kept secured since Project Stillwater. Evidence, not just of the experiments, but of who had ordered them. "You've got incoming," Jackson's voice crackled over their secure channel. "CIA tactical teams from the east, corporate contractors from the west. Someone just lit up every emergency channel in a 100-mile radius." Marcus watched thermal signatures converge on his position. 3 distinct groups, each with different objectives. The CIA wanted containment. The corporate team wanted silence. And Richards's extraction team wanted exposure. "Time to show them what this farm really is," Marcus transmitted. "Execute Protocol Omega." His property transformed. Hidden panels slid away, revealing military-grade defensive positions. Automated. Systems emerged from concealed bunkers, what had appeared to be ordinary agricultural equipment reconfigured into tactical assets. "My God," Richards breathed, watching through his tactical scope. "This isn't just a safe house. It's a fortress." "More than that," Marcus replied, activating secondary systems. "It's a server hub. Every piece of evidence from Project Stillwater, every document, every test result, all secured and ready for global distribution at my signal." Through his thermal imaging, Marcus watched the CIA teams establish their perimeter. Their movement patterns suggested they knew about the evidence and had orders to secure it at any cost. "The bioweapons facility wasn't just about illegal testing," Marcus continued, moving to his primary defensive position. "It was about creating leverage, insurance policies stored in DNA, genetic timestamps that could prove exactly when and where certain weapons were developed." Dr. Chen's voice cut in urgently. "The temporal markers. That's why they've spent 15 years hunting the samples. They're proof of who really authorized the program," Marcus finished. "Why certain corporations suddenly received billions in classified contracts. Why certain politicians were suddenly promoted." Shadow moved silently to his position, the dog's training evident in every motion. Around them, the farm's defenses continued to deploy. Each system had been carefully designed, tested, and perfected over years of preparation. "Multiple vehicles approaching," Jackson reported. "Thermal signatures suggest heavy weapons. They're not taking chances." Marcus checked his preparations. One final time, non-lethal countermeasures were in place, automated systems primed. The evidence was secured, backed up on servers across the globe, ready for release. "Last chance, Richards," he transmitted. "You wanted to expose the truth? This is how we do it. But once we start, there's no going back. Everything comes out, including the parts you don't know about." Through the storm, Marcus watched the colonel's thermal signature. The slight shift in posture told him everything. Richards hadn't known the full scope of what they'd stumbled into 15 years ago. "They're going to hit us with everything they have," Richards said finally. "Once they realize what you've got, let them come," Marcus replied coldly. "I've spent 15 years preparing for exactly this. Everyone thinks this is about a prison break, about one doctor with evidence. They're about to learn it's much bigger." The approaching forces were minutes out. 3 separate tactical teams, each with their own agenda, converging on a battlefield Marcus had spent his retirement perfecting. "This farm isn't just a defensive position," he transmitted to all channels. "It's a dead man's switch. Any attempt to breach it triggers an automatic upload. Everything gets released. Names, dates, evidence, all of it." The storm raged around them as Marcus made his final preparations. 15 years of waiting, of planning, of preparing for this moment. They thought they were coming to silence one witness. Instead, they were about to face something much more dangerous, a Delta Force commander who'd never stopped fighting his last war. The assault began simultaneously from 3 directions. CIA tactical teams breached from the east, corporate contractors from the west, and local authorities unwittingly provided cover from the south. Through his command center, Marcus watched them walk into the most sophisticated defensive network ever created by a single Delta operator. "Remember your training," he broadcast on all frequencies. "Everything you're about to experience was designed by the man who wrote your tactical manuals. Last chance to withdraw." They responded with a coordinated attack. Flashbangs and breach charges detonated against his outer defenses, while snipers set up in pre-sighted positions. Professional, methodical, exactly as their training dictated. Marcus smiled coldly. Execute primary response. His farm's defensive systems activated in sequence. The seemingly random placement of agricultural equipment suddenly made tactical sense. Irrigation pipes released obscuring steam, while automated systems deployed countermeasures against their thermal imaging. Multiple targets lost thermal lock, a CIA operator called out. "Switch to direct visual." His transmission cut off as Marcus's electronic warfare suite overwhelmed their communications. Each team found itself isolated, unable to coordinate with their support units. The corporate contractors tried to push through the Western approach, using advanced tactical gear that would have impressed Marcus 15 years ago. Now it just made them predictable. "Target their communications first," he advised Richards, who had positioned his extraction team around the helicopter. "Standard corporate protocol relies on constant coordination." Through his thermal imaging, Marcus watched the corporate team's formation collapse as their communications failed. Their training was good, but they'd never faced defenses designed by someone who'd helped develop their protocols. "CIA team breaching North Quadrant," Jackson reported over their secure channel. "They're good, using old-school hand signals. Minimal tech dependency." "As expected," Marcus replied, activating secondary defenses. The CIA team found themselves caught between automated turrets, firing rubber rounds, and precision-placed sonic deterrents. Their formations scattered as years of tactical training worked against them. Dr. Chen's voice came urgently over the radio. "Marcus, their backup teams are deploying. Multiple heavy weapons." "Let them come," he interrupted calmly. "Every system they bring online, every frequency they use, just adds to our evidence package. Dead Man's Switch is recording everything." The storm worked in his favor, the heavy snow reducing visibility and amplifying the effectiveness of his countermeasures. Through his command displays, Marcus watched 3 professional tactical teams slowly realize they were dealing with something far beyond their experience. "Target the command vehicle," a corporate team leader ordered, spotting what he thought was Marcus's control center. "Predictable," Marcus muttered, triggering the decoy building's defenses. The approaching team found themselves caught in a carefully prepared crossfire of non-lethal deterrents. Richard's voice cut through the chaos. "Marcus, CIA's bringing up their heavy team. These aren't regular operators." "I know," Marcus interrupted. "CIA Special Activities Division. I helped train them." The SAD team moved like ghosts through his outer defenses, their techniques showing the evolution of tactics Marcus had helped develop. But he'd spent 15 years preparing for exactly this scenario. "Shadow, execute pattern echo," he commanded. The dog moved silently through pre-planned routes, activating sophisticated countermeasures that even the SED team hadn't encountered. "My God," Richards breathed, watching through his tactical scope as Marcus's defenses systematically dismantled. 3 of the most elite tactical teams in the world. You didn't just prepare for them. You designed this entire operation around their specific protocols. 15 years, Marcus confirmed, moving to his final position. 15 years of analyzing their tactics, predicting their responses, and preparing countermeasures. This farm isn't just a fortress, it's a trap designed specifically for the people who tried to bury Project Stillwater. Through the storm, multiple agencies' tactical teams found themselves caught in a defensive network that seemed to anticipate their every move. Each countermeasure was precisely calculated, each response specifically tailored to their training. Upload. Initiating. Marcus broadcast on all frequencies. Every moment of this assault is being documented. Every tactic, every team's identification, every attempt to silence the truth. In 10 minutes, everything goes public. Project Stillwater, the corporate connections, the political payoffs, all of it. The assault team's thermal signatures showed their hesitation. They had trained for every possible scenario except this one, facing a Delta Force commander who had spent his retirement preparing specifically for them. "Stand down," Marcus ordered, coldly, "or discover why they called me Winter Ghost." Dawn broke over Marcus's farm, revealing the aftermath of the night's confrontation. The snow had stopped, leaving pristine white drifts that concealed any evidence of the sophisticated battle that had taken place. 3 tactical teams, CIA, corporate contractors, and local authorities, had withdrawn under official orders once Marcus's dead man's switch activated. Shadow patrolled the perimeter one final time, as Marcus watched multiple agencies' leadership scramble to contain a situation that had already escaped their control. His automated systems had performed perfectly, documenting every moment of their attempted assault. "Reports are already hitting major news outlets," Jackson's voice came through his secure channel. "Project Stillwater, the corporate connections, everything. No one's even trying to deny it anymore." Marcus stood on his porch, watching Dr. Chen and Richards prepare to depart with their extraction team. The truth she'd carried for 15 years would finally see light, along with the much larger conspiracy Marcus had uncovered during his years of patient preparation. "You planned this from the start," Richards said, approaching with newfound respect. "Bought this farm, prepared these defenses, knowing they'd eventually try to silence someone. You were waiting for the perfect moment." "Sometimes the best trap is patience," Marcus replied simply. "They spent 15 years hunting for evidence, never realizing they were being hunted themselves." Sarah's truck appeared on the horizon, approaching cautiously. She'd helped more than she knew over the years, being his eyes and ears in town, while never fully understanding what she was part of. "Going to be a lot of questions," she said, stepping down from her vehicle. "Whole town's talking about the helicopters, the tactical teams. Government's already trying to call it a training exercise." Marcus nodded. "Let them. The truth that matters is already out there. Some battles are won with bullets and tactics. Others are won with patience and preparation. Shadow sat alertly beside him as the morning sun illuminated his farm. To any observer, it would soon look exactly as it had before, just another quiet piece of Wyoming countryside. The sophisticated defensive systems would retract, the evidence servers would go silent, and the legend of Winter Ghost would fade. Back into whispered rumors. "What now?" Richards asked, preparing to board his helicopter. Marcus smiled slightly, scratching Shadow behind the ears. Now I go back to farming. Some soldiers never stop fighting. Others just choose different battlefields." The helicopter lifted off, carrying Dr. Chen and her evidence to testify before committees that were already being formed. Marcus watched them disappear into the morning sky, knowing his part in this operation was complete. Sarah studied him with new understanding. "You're not just a retired Delta operator, are you? This whole time your farm was just a farm," Marcus finished. "One that happened to be prepared for unexpected visitors." He turned back toward his house, ready to begin his morning routine just like any other day. After all, the best defense wasn't just about tactical preparation or sophisticated equipment. Sometimes it was simply about being ready when opportunity presented itself. Winter Ghost would return to being just a legend, whispered in special operations circles, and Marcus Blackwood would return to being exactly what he appeared to be. A farmer who kept to himself, watched his property carefully, and lived quietly with his dog, at least until the next time someone made the mistake of underestimating him.